So this is my first level in Unreal Tournament 4, and this is how I went about creating my first level in Unreal Tournament for the new engine, the new game, and trying to use the movement systems and all the fancy new stuff that the game offers the player. What you're looking at right now is a test map that I had set up just to test out the new wall running mechanics, to see how far people could jump, run, dodge, slide along walls. I figured out maximum distances people could cover, and then how the game worked well with curves and how that actually helps you in your wall sliding a lot. And then what I did was build that tiny little section of level to see what happens if I put a curved slope into a gameplay environment. From there, I take it into Photoshop. This is where I start building out my level from a top-down view. I find it nice and easy to have a floor plan for a level before I go and start making everything. It's not to say that I don't make some of the stuff before I draw the stuff like I started with. Originally it was done just as a little test piece, and then I thought, yep, I like that, let's see what we can do with it. So what you'll see now is a lot of me trying to figure out how wide my grid is. I started off with a 500 grid in Photoshop or 500 Unreal units is what I was comparing this grid to. Eventually I changed that when it gets towards the end. When the plan gets a bit more finalized, before I start putting it all into the engine, I figure out that some stuff just doesn't work. So there's a lot of me drawing things, and then there's a drawing in 3D to try and understand what this top-down looks like a bit more from a 3D perspective without having to build it. I will build a lot of it in the engine as soon as I have the plan done. It's a back and forth. Let's build it in the engine, see how it plays. If it plays badly, we'll change it. If it doesn't work, we'll change it. If it's fine, we'll keep it, and then maybe we add a little bit more onto it because it feels nice, and then we take the bit that we've added on and put it back into Photoshop in the top down. So this is a hell of a lot of let's do BSP everywhere and make what we drew. Because in my eyes, if you're drawing a plan out and you aren't playtesting it, then you can't understand what it's going to play like. A top-down is wonderful help for planning and stuff, but it's not so much help if you can't visualize the 3D space. So, and then I playtest, and a lot of this is how are the players in this environment going to play if there's a certain weapon or a certain item in this place. Originally, I'd planned for the belt to be on this little cross to the right side. And then that was where the belt was going to be, and it was a case of, is it too overpowered if the player comes up the other side and they can dodge around this wall? That's why the pillar got put in. So there was a bit of cover. It gives the player coming up from the slope on the left, which is the square with the arrow in it. The arrow points up to determine the top of the slope. And stuff like that. Always thinking about how a player can escape, where a player is going to go. What you're looking at now is me drawing another layer. I tend to split my height layers up on my plan into layers in Photoshop. So in this case, green is the top layer, this orange is the middle, and then red will be the lower layer. And these layers aren't necessarily the same z-axis level in the engine. It's just a nice idea for me visually to split up. This is going to be higher than the floor below it. What I'm drawing here is a lot of stuff that I did originally explain in the lovely long 12 hours. But it's a case of when a room flows into another room, it's nice to not always have your corridors line up exactly with the edge of the room. Try and make the room flow into the corridor, or the corridor flow into the room by having some corners on it, some 45-degree angles, making it so the room shape flows to the corridor. It helps direct your player around. And that's a good thing. If the player feels a bit trapped, it's not so nice. Here I'm drawing a lot of stuff in greeny yellow, trying to figure out where a player is going to go, if there's an item here, if these dots are health. Always think about what a player's option is from a position on the map. If they're in A or B and they want to get to the belt, where do they go? What do they do? So there was a lot of, this is actually drawing out health packs, the medium kegs, because in a duel environment, which is what this map is aimed for, it's nice to have kegs that are grouped together, because when you're having a fight with an enemy player and you did a lot of damage to him, but you know the shield belt isn't available at this moment, the 50 armor is closer to you, so it's easy for you to defend it, he's going to have to go and get some health, and the quickest way for a player to get health is to take some health kegs, 25 apiece, gets you 50 health very quickly. So the idea is that you split this health up away from things such as armors, because when a player is low, someone needs to go there. And when you split them into groups of 2 or 3 maybe, the player that's done the damage can then decide himself whether he wants to go and contest these healths, or if he wants to go maybe get his own health or go and take weapons and armor instead. So you have to think about where a player is going to go once they've taken damage. If it's too easy for players to stack too many health kegs at once. In this case, it's a dual map, so I have a total of 4 kegs in the final version. And that means that there's not a whole bunch of health on the map. There's I think it's 10 or so vials as well, which is another 50 health. So a player can't stack health very easily, so it's very important to position the health kegs in a way that can be contested over easily, instead of having 6 health kegs spread around your map, and a player can just walk to any of them, and the player that's done the damage and should be on the chase doesn't have an exact idea of where the other player is going to go because of how much health there is on the map. So having a few sets of health kegs can help tell a player where someone else is going to go. So at this point, again, there's some more 3D drawings that I'm doing to explain things, and that one's to explain how this ramp is cutting into the wall, because this green section on the left side, or in the middle rather, is it's going to be the higher up ground, so the person on the higher up ground naturally has an advantage. So having that cut away into the wall with the ramp gives just the slightest bit of cover to the player on the ramp. Again, lots more testing. A lot of drawing lines on these corners. That's for me to say this is a dodge slope, dodge ramp, whatever. And then this is, well, you can't easily tell it. There's a nice dodge trick jump that I had in my testing that I really wanted to implement into the map. So that's what I aim to do here. It's a case of, well, this is nice. I want to find a way of putting it in, measure it out in my test map, and then go ahead and put that into the top-down drawing and figure out if we can fit it in. This is just me some tidying up on my drawings because I can't draw 45-degree lines very well. But this is the trick jump that I have. There's that slide along the wall and then you jump over to the platform on the right, which I'm sure I playtest in a moment. Or maybe I don't play test it now because I know it already works and I'm just trying to figure out a lower level below this dodge ramp. A lot of the stuff I do when I'm designing the layouts for rooms is try and make sure a player always has a few options. So at least two options if it's a risk reward section, like this red section with the curve to the bottom left. This is where the shield belt ends up in the final version, and that's why it's got so few options for the player, because it's a heavy risk reward area. If the player is down there and he has 6 options to run away, it's very hard to attack that player if you have less of a stack than he does. So force the player that's in the advantage to be at a disadvantage. So in that case, 1 or 2 exits can work well, with more entrances preferably, to allow a different player to attack in. But for most other rooms, between 3 and 4 exits is a very good amount. They don't have to be they don't have to exit that room. They can just be positions into the same room. So a lift jump is not necessarily an exit from a room. It just takes you to a higher level of the room, but it allows you to move your player out of harm's way. So this is continued drawings of ramps and trying to figure out how this underground section is going to work if we have all these lifts. Things with lifts and jump pads, they're heavy sound cues for players. A good player will always be listening for the sound of another player, whether that be footsteps, picking up health vials, lifts or jump pads. Making sure that there's not too many options for a player when they're listening to stuff like that means don't spam your map with tons and tons of lifts in every room or jump pads in every room. Jump pads are a very limited choice for a player as well. So if you hear someone on a jump pad, you know you're pretty certain that that player is going to end up in a certain position because the jump pad will force them there. So in the case of that upper one in the middle with the circle and the blue cross, that's there so the player can get from the lower level to the medium level if they're running away, because this lower level is going to be somewhere that's dropped down into quite a lot due to the middle section of the map. Everything from the upper to the lower level is all open to drop into it. And it's a very long line of sight in there, so the jump pad allows you to escape quickly. So that's me drawing out some jumps on there as well from the lifts and the wall slides. This was where I figured out that maybe my grid needs to be resized a little bit. So this is then putting all of this on a grid at 400 by 400 is what I went with in the end. Rescaling what I had and doing that. So as I was saying about the jump pads, forcing a player into a certain position, when you associate the sound with that, the player can always be forced into shooting towards that lift or that jump pad, rather. Making sure that someone that's going up a jump pad has some form of cover from the sides and stuff, or that their jump will allow them to escape harm, is not necessarily an important thing, but it's a nice thing to offer a player so that a jump pad can be a choice for them, rather than forcing them into an awkward situation if they don't want to take the jump pad and get comboed or shot in the face with a rocket. What you'll see with a lot of these white lines is either this is a case of me measuring something when I am looking at my top down to figure out how many grid units it is. I'll draw it out, measure it across, and then try and figure out roughly what that scale is. Because when you take something from a top down drawing, it never seems to want to work perfectly in the engine, and there's a lot of guesswork involved. This is some very bad BSP that's just a simple, I need to fill this gap in with something because it doesn't match the mesh. And while I could be doing the mesh in 3ds Max or something, it's much easier just to throw stuff together with BSP. The only meshes I really have in this are for the curved slopes, for the wall jumping, because it's much nicer that way. That blueprint stuff you see there is just me putting a trigger volume below my map and teleporting the player back up to the playable area if he falls out, rather than dying and waiting to respawn. And this is just a lot of testing these trick jumps that I have intended in the middle, making sure everything is easy for a player. The trick jumps work in multiple angles, multiple directions. You don't want a player to have to struggle really hard to complete a trick jump, because if a player has to try extremely hard to make a trick jump, then generally they aren't going to use it. It should be something that's used to either make their life easier or to get into a better position. And doing a trick jump means you're going to be making more noise in the form of dodges and so on, and making sure that the player that does the trick jump is heard means that the other opponent should realize that they're trying to do said jump if they know the map, or at the same skill. They should know, okay, he's doing a trick jump here, he's doing that there, he's trying to get into this position, and so forth. Again, lots of playtesting with my layout. The layout is pretty much finished in Photoshop at this point. It's never the final design because things will change once you put them in and play them. It's just really nice to have a plan there. You can imagine it in a 3D visualization that, yeah, a player in this situation is going to be able to go between A and B. I can put a shield belt here, I can put a rocket launcher here. Although I say that, but generally when I'm making a layout, I don't think about placements for weapons. Most of the time when I'm doing a weapon placement, it's at the end, which you'll see later in the video. But sometimes it's nice to design a room around a weapon because certain weapons work really well in certain situations, and it's fine to do that. Like, it's always nice to have somewhere to start when you make a map. So if you've got a great idea for making a place where that you can have a shock rifle and he shoots through a hole in the ceiling and combos the guy above him taking a shield belt or something like that, then start with that, build that little piece of your level and try and expand on it. As long as you've got somewhere to start, that's always a nice thing. Think about all the fancy moves that people can pull off, which is how I started this level. As, okay, these curves are cool. Let's build something with this in an environment where a player could play. And then I expanded on that design and take it into the full level. As well as not really building my levels personally around weapons all of the time, the only things I'm generally considering are armor placements because they're very important to the level design in risk reward. A weapon doesn't necessarily need risk reward unless it's something like a redeemer. But a shield belt, your chest armor, are very important items when it comes to Duel especially. The same with TDM, with things like U damage or Berserk. They're very important things that should be thought out with the level design because of the risk reward element that they have associated with them. What I'm doing right now is changing this corridor because with the design that I have in my top down, the corridor doesn't feel wide enough to the player. Dodging around it and is very awkward, so I redraw it. And we're adding a certain amount of extra space, which it doesn't change the layout drastically, but it's a tiny little change that just makes the playability that much better. When you're working with 45-degree angles in BSP, things get a little annoying when it comes to sizing. So you will probably see me, or may have seen me already, I didn't notice, take a straight piece and rotate it 45 degrees to get the width and so on, like that. To make sure that all my pieces are going to be roughly the same distance. And here again, using a piece, measure it out at a certain distance because it's just nice and easy to have that there rather than using the ruler with the middle mouse button in the engine. Here we use a mesh with the slope on to then shape the BSP. This is a wonderful editor bug where I can't extrude my BSP and I have to just copy and paste some stuff. There's a few bugs that mess up doing little things quickly in the engine currently because it's still in development, obviously. And again, this is just playtest it, playtest it, playtest it. Always playtest what you're building because if you're not playtesting it, you don't know if it works, you don't know how it feels. And if you don't know what it feels like or plays like, then it's really hard to finish a design and then find out that there's a bit in the middle that's really complex that you really don't like, but you don't know how to redesign it. And this is why going back and forth between a top-down and a 3D is very nice to figure out how much space you have around the area and what you can fit in. And again, more playtesting of it. And this is me trying to figure out if I can turn off single tap in the editor play window, and I'm not sure you still can, but it makes testing things like dodging on slopes really annoyingly awkward sometimes. And what I find out here in a second, I think, is that my top-down drawing doesn't really relate properly to the 3D world in terms of z-axis because I've decided that this middle level is all one flat level. But when it comes to designing it, I have to put this slope in here because otherwise the floor when it goes under this platform is way too close to the ceiling. A player height or the room for a player to jump around in should be around at least 400 units. Otherwise, players hit their heads when they're dodging around, and it's rather annoying to the player. Here at this point, I'm looking at this corner, and I'm thinking, I'm not sure this is going to work. It's really tight in here. Forcing a player through there is going to mean they're easily attackable from something like combo or rocket splash damage. So I'm already thinking about redesigning the this little area around the back of the jump pad. And again, playtest it some more. Now this is the bit I'm talking about, where the jump pad is, it comes up and there's really not a lot of room behind this jump pad exit. You're very close to a wall and you're very likely to get shot at here. So I start thinking, okay, let's take this wall back. Let's try and match the same shape that's coming up around the back of the jump pad to the wall behind it, just to open it up so the player isn't going to get destroyed horribly. And one thing when you're making levels, that's something I spoke about while making this video in lovely 12 hours of footage that I decided was maybe too much to upload. Try to make sure that your walls are nice and thick, because when you get to meshing them out, it's very annoying if you have very thin walls to put meshes on one side and not have them clip over to the other side. It's a mistake I actually make later on. When I adjust some stuff, I end up with a rather thin wall in a few places. And this bit that I'm working on right now, cutting here next to this lift, causes a few holes to the floor under the lift. So it gets adjusted a lot. Originally this doorway is supposed to be much wider, but this lift doesn't really match up with my top down and kind of messes with some stuff. So there's some very narrow walls around this section, which aren't exactly the best thing, and you should try to avoid them if you plan on meshing a level out. If you plan on just making a level out of BSP and making it look pretty, then it doesn't matter too much. But if you want to think ahead about what you're going to mesh, it's nice to know that you're going to have a certain amount of room to play with when you get to meshing. I'm not someone that thinks a lot about the visual design that I'm going to go with when I build a map. I'm thinking about the gameplay, because that's what's important. If the gameplay doesn't work, then it doesn't matter how good a map looks, because is anyone going to play it if it's not fun to play? It's hard to say, but probably not. So try and make sure that the gameplay is there first. Maybe you've got an idea for a wonderful looking piece that you think you can make work with gameplay, then sure, go ahead, design that fancy piece and make the rest of the map work around it for gameplay. Lots and lots of resizing BSP pieces. I don't use a lot of subtracting. When I built maps with for UT3, there was a lot of build a big cube, subtract from it. But with the plan on maybe meshing a level out, I find it much easier just to be using additive brushes for a lot of the stuff. Because when you come to putting meshes in, I find it quite a lot easier to just remove the pieces of BSP from your additive brushes rather than having massive amounts of issues if you try and delete a wall or something when you're using subtractive brushes. Because you'll find yourself making your subtractive brushes bigger and messing up other bits. And it's much easier to just remove that BSP than to what was I going to say? Much easier to remove the BSP than to modify existing BSP when all you want to be doing is removing it and replacing it with meshes. Because of the height differences that I haven't really thought of in my top-down too much, there's a lot of ramp resizing. And a lot of the ramps end up longer than they are in the top-down because they have to cover more of a vertical height. Which isn't too much of a problem as long as you have the space for the ramp to be extended. This is just me being very anal to detail, and even though it's a block out, it's rough, it's ugly. When it comes to gameplay, if there's a lot of bits and pieces that stick out or there's holes here and there, then players will get stuck on them, and that's not fun. So even though it's a rough block out BSP shell, you don't want players to be getting stuck on everything. It's a lot of testing with the meshes for the curved slopes, because when they're matching up with the BSP, instead of having a mesh to match them up with, it can get very annoying if the player gets stuck when sliding between the BSP and the mesh. So there's quite a bit of back and forth with changing those pieces. And a lot of extruding on this to make stuff work. It doesn't matter if you build a lot of stuff with just single cube brushes and reshaping them a lot, or if you take a cube brush and you extrude it 10 times. As long as you realize that sometimes extruding a lot means if you want to get around to meshing and delete a simple piece, you're going to delete quite a lot of work instead. And the more you extrude, the more likely it's probably going to break. Here I'm testing some stuff that I don't have on my plan. It's a case of if someone is dropping into this hole, if I put a boat down here or something, is it fair that there's only 2 ways out? Or it's technically 3 ways out. There's a jump pad, and then a corridor in each direction. But the corridor to the south towards, or in the same direction as the jump pad, is almost one direction. So I was seeing if I could put a dodge slope in there to dodge up and escape, but it didn't quite work out because of the height difference. So maybe it's something that I put a box in that a player can jump on and dodge out, or as it is right now, it's currently left in the same way that it was drawn, with no real fancy stuff. Just a case of you still have 2/3 exits. And I think it works okay because it's not an area that gets explored too often. This is a bit where my top-down drawing and 3D in the engine don't really want to go together too well. And some of the sizes are a bit off. This bit was in my top-down. It's a case of, this is fun. We like dodge ramps. Let's use a dodge ramp, see what we can do. So there's a lot of messing around with this dodge ramp to make it work. The curve doesn't work because dodging up the curve just pushes you off the edge. So then I go back to having a 90-degree corner with dodge ramps, which works quite well, but it really breaks the flow when you force a player to use the dodge ramp Having a dodge ramp as an alternative choice of movement is really nice. Like if they want to take that to get up to a higher level rather than walking around a longer route, then that's great. But in this case, there wasn't a alternative to walk around. It was a case of you're using the dodge ramp or not, and that really didn't feel fun when testing it. Yeah, there's a lift jump next to it, but if you don't use the lift jump and you're standing on this platform where you dodged over, then using the dodge ramp really felt kind of boring. So in a minute, the dodge ramp gets removed. Or I say in a minute, maybe it's in a while. But I just remembered it now. Again, here's another bit where the top down doesn't want to match my world. And there's a lot of resizing, reshaping to make stuff fit. Because at this point I had planned on having this dodge ramp on the brown level here to the green level. Not the green level, sorry. The brown level to the upper brown level under that green wall. But that means I need quite a lot of height difference. And you'll see that that doesn't work when we try to match it up on the other side with the ramp coming from the upper level. So in the end, I scrapped the dodge ramp here. Because making this ramp really long to fit was the most boring ramp in the world. Nobody wants to go up a ramp that goes on forever. And that's what it basically created. It was a ramp that went on forever. And that's no fun for a player to walk up. This is probably the worst decision I made in making the map. I wanted this spiral slope towards this lower level. And that meant I was going to make it with the spiral staircase in the engine. It would have just been easier to make a mesh than something else, but I had to do it. And I'd advise not doing this because even though I managed to not make a BSP hole somehow, normally this is going to create some BSP holes or something because it's a horrible way of making creations. Just stick to maybe some cylinders and cubes everywhere. This is now me trying to fix the mess up with the height differences. I brought up the lower level so that, or what is supposed to be the mid level, I brought it up so it would match the slope on the other side. Because there's supposed to be this nice long dodge slope around. And for a dodge slope to work, ideally both ends are on the same height level. Because going up a dodge slope does not work. And while going down is okay, it's no use the other direction, and that's boring. At this point, I'm deciding that maybe this ramp is too thin. If it's such a large ramp, it's kind of weird to have a really long ramp and have it so thin. This is just filling in all these gaps so I have a better idea of what this is actually going to end up looking like. And then realizing that it doesn't match up with my top down, and this doorway is supposed to be a little bit closed off so you can walk up the ramp without being shot. This bit of the map is a bit that I really didn't like when I got around to testing it a lot. So it gets changed drastically from the original drawing. But this is me now having an almost completed layout and running around everything, testing all the trick jumps that I'd planned, thinking a lot more about where a player can get to and go from, how, in this case, this upper level causes this ramp to be so much longer than I feel like it should be, that I lower this upper level so this ramp is shorter. And again, back to testing everything. And where this jump pad is, originally it's just a corridor, but that really limits what the player can do if they're forced to go down here, because it's a dead end. And a player at a dead end that's only got one option of escape is probably going to have to take it. So I decided to make it a little bit wider and make it possible for a player down there to dodge around and maybe not take the jump pad if they're forced into it and getting shot at. It's just something that gives the player not necessarily more options, but more choice in that situation, unless they're the same thing. Because, as I said before, if you take a jump pad, you're making yourself a hell of an easy target. Which is what it was supposed to be. It was supposed to be something that made people an easy target. This is the bit where I changed this horrible section with the dodge ramp, actually. I think. Maybe not. This is putting in the pillars because it's an open area, and having this cover is actually very helpful. This is testing some stuff with the corners. Maybe we can put some slopes in here, some curves in here. Because originally my design has a lot of curves. This bit is opening up this lift, because when I ran around in the area, it felt like the lift was really dangerous. Because it was such a tight entrance to the lift. So I widened it up a bit. But only on the lower level. The upper level is still quite tight at this point. This is where I decided that when I was in my test map, I made a nice 180 degrees dodge slope. And it made some really nice fun moves. So I decided that now that I'd redesigned this area with a dodge ramp, I was going to put something else in here to give the player another option of this area. And that's how this dodge ramp came in. And it took a bit of playtesting and resizing and rescaling and moving about before it worked properly. But this is it. And it just allows you to get around the back. But I didn't want this to now become the main choice of movement, because this bit where I delete the upper dodge ramps is still the easiest route. So having this section around the back is something that I wanted just to make it an alternative choice for the player. It's not necessarily the easiest choice. In the final version, it's filled with water. So if the player fails doing the slide around it or dodging around it, they're forced into water, they're going to make a sound. And they're probably going to get shot at if the other guy is nearby. And when you're in water getting shot at, it's not going to go too well. I cut away the inside of the curve so that people couldn't easily dodge off that, just making it a little bit more difficult, and filling it in with some water. Playing with the water volume to make it so that if a player does fall in it, it's actually it actually impacts the player's movement quite heavily. By default, a water volume doesn't do that much against a walking player when it's shallow water. And this is just a lot of running around playtesting now that we have lifts and this new section in. And I think at this point, I'm starting to think about maybe places I can start putting weapons or my armors. Because when it's in a 3D space, it's much easier to visualize how risky a position is. This is actually me figuring out where I want to put shock rifle, rocket launcher, stuff like that. Because each weapon plays differently in a section of the map. And running around and playing with those weapons throughout the entire map, you get a really nice feel for if that weapon is going to work in a room. If it's too enclosed, then maybe the shock rifle is no good, because shock rifle is primarily a long range weapon. You can combo and cause some splash, but it's not easily a high damage weapon up close, even if you're spamming shock cores. Its primary stuff is shoot the guy at long range with a beam or combo him before he comes around the corner. So making sure that the person using that weapon can use it well is important. This is the bit where I'm like, I don't like this back corner at all. It doesn't work. So it's very thin, it's very boring. There's a lot of long lines of sight around here, so I really wanted to split it up, and that's what I do by splitting this one long path into a wider path split into two sections, with one piece being slightly higher up than the other, which allows me to add in another trick jump, which you'll see soon. But again, it's like this was a very boring corridor with one way in, one way out. It doesn't give the player many options. So I had to change that, because it's not fun being a player having two options when there's literally no risk reward to be taken. So I make it wider. I add this upper section. There's the lift jump here that allows a player to get to the upper section. There's the higher section in the middle that they can dodge down onto it from. And a lot of playtesting to make sure these jumps are all possible. I put a dodge slope on the end of it to figure out if that's what I wanted. I decided against that and went for a dodge slope where I originally had one on the inside wall of the long corridor, because it allows the player to slide along, or speed up and slide along, or they can dodge up it and then we'll dodge over back onto this upper platform. So it kind of has a two-role thing. This is almost the finished layout at this point. Most of the map has a wall around it, and there's a lot of running around and thinking about weapon placement again. This is a piece where I'm thinking this trick jump from the lift over the wall slide doesn't work because the player can't easily get out of the lift, so I open up the side of the lift a little bit. And that's actually something I do with the other lift on the middle inside as well. This is where I put the other dodge slope in and dodge up and around. And then I was like, maybe we want to pull this wall back. Does it work if I pull the wall back? What happens? Is this too wide? Is this not wide enough? And I had a really wide upper section. I actually shrunk it down a little bit because it felt like it was taking up too much space for no reason. Filling in some walls. having a finished layout before I'm even putting weapons, health, and armor into the map. What am I doing here? I'm finding some water. Give it a light build, run around, see that things are broken. And this is going to be a lot of faffing about trying to figure out why things are broken. But it turns out it's just an engine bug, and I can't do anything about it. So there's a lot of ugly textures in the map currently because of some engine bugs. That means I can't set up alignments on BSP surfaces properly. Which hopefully they fix, and then I can make it not look so bad in the future. And again, playtest it, playtest it, playtest it. And there's a lot of making sure everything feels like it's wide enough for the player. If a player feels cramped somewhere, then there better be a good reason for it. Like it's a very overpowered shortcut or something like that. This is me updating my top-down view to match the wonderful level that we've built, because if my top-down doesn't match, then when I get to trying to plan out more stuff, if I want to, then it's not helpful. And this is helpful at looking at all of the stuff that I changed in terms of the layout, because quite a lot of stuff did change in the end, because you won't ever manage to design the perfect layout the first time. Everything will always want changing a bit. And making sure that you're willing to playtest everything and then playtest it some more and some more and some more, and then go and ask people, is this good? Does this work? And people will say no. And then you need to change it again. It's really nice to have the ability to draw something out and plan it ahead before you go and change everything. And this is where I start thinking about armor placement. And I really wanted to put the belt in the lower section of the map because it was very, very accessible, but not the safest place to run from. But once I put it there, even though it was a very nice position, what happens is placing the other armors in the map becomes very difficult because... Oh, and this is me failing to place a shield belt because I don't know where the shield belt thing is. So we load up the test map and figure it out. But once the shield belt is in here and I start running around and thinking about it, while it's a wonderful place for the shield belt to be, when I start thinking about placing my chest armor, it doesn't work too well, because anywhere I place the chest armor in the map means that there's a very short time between the grabbing the chest armor and the belt, and that's not good, because if a player can easily stack the chest armor and the belt, they're going to be in a really advantageous position. So originally I want it here, but the lift jump over or just walking up and dropping down is really quick. There's not very many other risk-reward places in the map. So in the end, it's a case of, okay, we'll move the shield belt to somewhere else in the map. Because if I can't place the other armors in sensible, fair places, then the balance of the level just doesn't work very well. So we put the belt down in that lower section with only 2 exits, which I think actually might work out better for the shield belt. because it's less escape options, and it puts it off to one side of the map, so the 50 armor is then on the other side, which makes it so that if you have the shield belt, you can't instantly run and grab the 50, so someone has no chance of challenging you for the shield belt. At least maybe they can grab the 50 while you're the other side of the map. And I put the thigh pads down where I originally had the belt, because the middle of the map is then a little empty. And now we start thinking about the weapon placement. And the thing about weapon placement is these three weapons, the shock, the rocket launcher, and the flak cannon, can't be easily grabbable by everyone. If someone can spawn and grab a shock and a rocket, or a shock and a flak, they have one of the best weapons at range, the other being the sniper, and one of the best weapons at close range being the flak and rockets. Very powerful at close. Rockets are probably more preferred for mid-range, but you shouldn't make it so that a player can grab all of these. The flak and a rocket together aren't too bad because it limits the player's ranged capability. So if you place those weapons somewhere where ranged is actually quite a powerful area on the map, it makes them less effective. So you can do that with your weapons. You can put a weapon in a certain place where it's not very useful, which isn't always a good thing. You don't want to have someone pick up a weapon and not be able to do anything with it. But it doesn't make that weapon so powerful. So there's a lot of running around figuring out where a weapon should go, which rooms feel good for those weapons, and then trying to place other weapons opposite them on the map. So make sure that your shock, your rocket, and your flak aren't together. Don't put the sniper next to the shock. Link gun, minigun, and bio rifle aren't the most sought after weapons, and they're fairly balanced. So they're kind of the filler weapons, I find, that fit in between everything else. So this is a lot of running around, figuring out, do these weapons work here? Is there enough weapons in each area? And that's me putting the helmet into this little corner. So having the helmet here is interesting because it's really close to the belt, but because of how dangerous this position actually is for the helmet, it means that having the helmet next to the belt isn't that overpowered. If you're going to take the helmet and go to the belt, that's okay because there's a sniper rifle near the belt, and you can block a headshot. That's great. If you are coming from the belt to get the helmet and you have the belt, then you might fall in and you might die horribly in the pool of water. And I really wanted to make players try and use this dodge ramp. So the helmet's placed in a way that players can just dodge in and grab it and dodge out, or they can slide around and pick it up. And there's a lot of playing around with weapons in the map, see what works where. At this point I was like, maybe even though I can dodge over this gap, should I put this curve in? It turns out no, I shouldn't put a curve in here because it doesn't work. But again, it's just, maybe this would work. Maybe there needs to be another option for a player here, or maybe it's fine as is. Maybe if I just adjust something else, it's easier for the player to do this dodge. This is just taking a look at the things that I changed. There's a lot of little bits around the level that changed. This is me drawing some areas around my armors to figure out where health can or can't be. Thinking about where is a player going to go if they are picking up weapons, armors, and whatnot. Because your health can force a player into very certain situations. Placing health kegs all in the middle of the map means a lot of players are going to go to the middle of the map. If you place your health kegs on opposite sides of the map to where any of your armors are, then a player can run between your health and your armors and utilize the map a bit more. At this point, I figured that maybe the Stinger and Link Gun could swap positions because I really feel like this room next to the belt has no weapon. This Link Gun just there didn't exist before, and it really needed to change because the room had no real weapon. It had a bio rifle, which is great for taking off a belt, but it's not very great for dealing damage all of the time. So in the end, there's 2 Link Guns in the map on opposite sides, and a Stinger gets moved. And now this is thinking about the health placement, and I opened that bit up behind the jump pad because it's a really risky position. But because it's close to the thigh pads, it allows the player to get 50 health and the thigh pads, which is very nice for someone that's low on health. And then the other 2 health kegs have to go on the other side of the map to force a player to have a decision between, do I want to go to those 2 to get 50 health or these 2 to get 50 health? And then you can you can have that mental decision in your brain between both players. Well, is he going to go and get those health, or is he going to go and get those ones? Which ones do I go to contest? With health files, a lot of their power is not in giving someone health, but it's giving the other player information. Putting health files next to each other in a row. 2 health files next to each other, or 3 health files, or just 1, creates certain sounds when you pick them up. So if there's 2, then you go ding ding. If there's 3, you go ding ding ding. If there's 2 far apart, then you go ding ding. And those sound cues can be really helpful to higher skilled players that are listening for them in positioning exactly whereabouts someone is. So if you put health files down, don't always have 2 health files in the same layout everywhere. Right now I'm just planning out ammo. And when I do ammo on weapons in maps now, I try not to put all the ammo with a weapon because it allows the player to camp a weapon very easily. If you put a shock rifle and put 2 shock cores next to it, you don't want to have a player that's really good with the shock rifle be able to camp that weapon. And if you put all of the ammo on the map next to the shock rifle, that's exactly what they do. So placing just 1 next to, or not even right next to, in the same room, in the same general area, forces a player to take the weapon and then move away from it to get the ammo. And then if you put the other ammo the other side of the map, the player has to move around because ammo has to respawn, obviously. So you can stop people camping weapons, and with ammo and mounts in a level, you can kind of control which weapons are used a lot. So if you put 20 shot cores in a map, the shock rifle is going to get used a lot because there's 20 shot cores of ammo. If you put 2 shot cores in a map, or 1 shot core and a shock rifle, then the shock rifle is going to be a very limited weapon because there's not that much ammo on the map. Unless someone is very good at stacking and controlling, they might gradually build up their ammo count. But it's the same for every weapon. So if you put 30 rocket launcher ammo packs in there, then rocket gets used a lot. If you put 2 link guns in the map, like I have in this one, then you don't need as many ammo drops for the link gun around the map because each weapon pickup counts as ammo as well. So in this map, link gun could actually be quite a heavily used weapon because there's 2 pickups to fill in areas. Something that I didn't talk about with the health files is when you're placing health files, don't overdo it. Never just put health files everywhere. As I said, they're really good for being positional sound cues to the other player. And that's what I think of health files as now, more than giving health to someone. They're very good at telling someone where someone is. So I think I have about 50 health worth of health files in this map, which isn't a lot, which means players have to be really careful about controlling their armors and whatnot. There's 100 health worth of medium kegs on the map, so players that are under 100 health can get back to high health quite quickly by picking up some health kegs and then just grabbing some vials as they go. But at the same time, they're gonna give away their positions by doing so when you've placed them in 2s, 3s, and 1s, like this map has. There's one health vial near the center lift where there's a nice wall dodge over and back. And that one health vial is there because if a player is dodging from one side to the other, they're almost always going to land on that health vial. If they want to dodge the other way, they're probably going to hit the health vial to dodge over. If they want to go towards the lift, they're probably going to hit the health vial to go to the lift. So that health vial is there for 5 health. It's almost nothing. But to someone else that's listening, you know exactly that they picked up 1 health vial, they're just there. But that's when a smart player that's running around knows there's other health vials in the area. Like, there might be 3 health vials in the area, but they could just pick up 1 of them. And then he now thinks you're going to the lift, maybe. So there's a lot of mind games in Unreal in that aspect. And this is just me throwing some horrid textures in to cover up horrid BSP. And looking at some fancy ass reflections in that texture. But a lot of this is very quick, very nasty, not really thinking about anything. I just want to have a playable layout that's not grey box everywhere. So here I'm just adding some lights around the 3 main weapons, Shock, Rocket, and Flak, to add some more colour to their rooms. Just helps clean some stuff up. And now I'm thinking about player spawns. You don't want to place player spawns right on top of every weapon, because it forces a player to choose that weapon. If there's a spawn right next to the shock rifle, then you can grab the shock rifle off spawn. Great. But what if the shock rifle's not there? Now you don't have a weapon. And the other guy probably knows where you spawned if he's any good. So placing a spawn between weapons is much more helpful to a player that's spawning. It gives them a choice of going, okay, there's a rocket launcher over this way and there's a link gun over this way, but I know when I died that the rocket launcher was down, so maybe I should go towards the link gun instead and grab that because I think it's up. Again, if you're timing weapons, which some players do, then you know these weapons may be coming up or maybe not going up. If you know both of the weapons are down, then go and grab some armor instead, get some health instead. Who knows? What happens here is very interesting. I just copied from another map some lights over after I accidentally deleted them, and then all my weapon bases disappeared, which was kind of annoying. So had to replace my weapon bases. That sucked. I'm going to be honest. Having to replace weapon bases, I don't know why it happened. Random bug. Here's me just putting some more lights in because some areas are dark. All of my dodge ramps in this map right now are bright blue because it's nice. But yeah, this is pretty much the end of it. I'll give it a playtest in a second after I build some paths, after I figured out how they were built by looking at another map. But yeah, that's a look at how I built the initial layout for DM-Scooch. The thought process behind some of this level designing stuff, because people have asked me, how do you make a map? How do I do this? There's a lot of people on the forums asking, what do they do? How do they do it? What do they need to do? And hopefully this gives some idea at looking at building a deathmatch map. And maybe people can do some wonderful things with this knowledge. Who knows? Thank you for watching, and I hope this was of some help to somebody.